At noon today, the Senate will resume consideration of the VA Appropriations Bill. Right now, for 2 hours, they'll be in a period of morning business. The Senate will then recess from 12:30 p.m. to 2:15 p.m. Eastern for their weekly party luncheons. Live coverage at the Senate always here on C-SPAN 2.
Let us pray. Eternal Lord God, our inability to solve our problems persistently reminds us of our need of your mercy and power. Manifest your power on Capitol Hill, doing for our lawmakers what they can't do for themselves. Break down the barriers that seem impenetrable, enabling them to walk by your Spirit toward the accomplishment of goals that will bless and protect America. Lord, divert them from the strategies that lead to dead ends, guiding them toward unity and consensus. Shine forth with your power during this challenging season, we pray in your mighty name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., July 19, 2011, to the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Jean Shaheen, a senator from the state of New Hampshire, to perform the duties of the chair. Son Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
The Majority Leader.
Following any leader remarks, the Senate will be in a period of morning business for up to 2 hours, with the two sides alternating 30-minute blocks, with the Republicans controlling the first block. Following that morning business, the Senate will resume consideration of H.R. 2055, the Military Construction Bill. The Senate will recess from 12:30 until 2:15 today for our caucus luncheons. We continue to work on amendments to the Military Construction Appropriations Bill. We hope to complete that bill within the next day. Note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander. Sayat.
Yeah. You still want. Madam President,
The Republican leader.
are we in a quorum call?
We are.
I ask unanimous consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, today members of the House of Representatives will have a chance to stand up and be counted. They'll show with their votes whether they believe in freezing Washington's current spending habits in place and raising job-killing taxes, or whether they believe, as I do, that the reckless spending and debt of the past 2 years has brought us to this point of crisis, and that something serious must be done to rein it in without damaging a fragile economy with job-killing taxes. Frankly, it's that simple. Those who support cut, cap, and balance that the House takes up today will be voting for getting our fiscal house in order and against an unsustainable status quo. And those of us who've been calling for serious short and long-term action to cut spending, rein in our debt, and preserve entitlements congratulate those who support it. And we look forward to voting on the same legislation here in the Senate soon. And before we do, it's important to remember how far we've come in this debate. Just a few months ago, the President's primary goal was to raise the debt limit without any spending cuts or long-term fiscal reforms at all. Nothing but more debt. Now he's claiming not only to support cuts, but a proposal that he likes to call a big deal. Anyone who's looked at the figures knows that it isn't. But the larger point here is that the American people have already won this debate. No one, not even the President, can claim to support the status quo anymore, even when, in fact, he does. But, of course, winning the debate isn't nearly as important as achieving the reforms that are needed to convince the world that we're actually serious about getting our fiscal house in order. That's why Republicans continue to hold out for significant reforms. And that's why we'll continue to fight for serious long-term reforms this week. Republicans have tried to persuade the President of the need for a serious course correction, but weeks of negotiations have shown that his commitment to big government is simply too great to lead to the kind of long-term reforms we need to put us on a path to both balance and economic growth. So we've decided to bring our case to the American people. The President recently cited a poll that suggests Americans want to see balance in this debate. I'd point him to another poll showing nearly 2 out of 3 Americans want a balanced budget. That's what Republicans are fighting for. Today, Republicans in the House will vote on legislation that cuts government spending now, caps it in the future to the average of the last 40 years, and which will only allow for a raising of the debt limit if it's accompanied by a constitutional amendment to balance the federal budget. Cut, cap, and balance is the kind of tough legislation Washington needs and that Americans want. And Republicans will spend the week trying to convince Democrats to join us in supporting it. Every single Republican in the Senate supports a balanced budget amendment. All we need is 20 Democrats to join us in supporting this common sense legislation. Now, at least 23 of our friends on the other side have said or suggested they support the idea and told their constituents that they'll lead on the issue. We think they should have an opportunity to follow through on their statements with an actual vote. So I'll repeat what I said yesterday to my Democratic friends. If I were you, I would take a long look at the cut, cap, and balance legislation the House is taking up today and ask yourself the following question. Ask yourself, are you so committed to the status quo that you'll vote no on a bill to balance the federal budget? I would strongly urge my Democratic friends to join us in supporting the cut, cap, and balance plan. The American people sent us here to make tough choices. Agreeing to balance the budget shouldn't be one of them. This should be an easy one. I would urge my colleagues in the strongest possible terms to join us. It's time to balance the books. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll. Oops. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Gaga.
Madam President, today the House will consider legislation that would force the nation to default on our financial obligations for the first time in history, unless Congress adopts a new. Well, let's put it this way. What the House is working on today would force the nation to default on our financial obligations for the first time in history. They're going to do it with a radical new constitutional amendment. That amendment would impose arbitrary, reckless budget caps that would without a doubt force massive cuts to Medicare, Social Security, and other crucial benefits. At the same time, it would constitutionally protect wasteful loopholes and tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires. To meet an arbitrary spending cap at 18% of gross domestic product, it would shrink benefits and services back to the levels not seen since 1966. Madam President, in 1966, Medicare was 1 year old, and there were 100 fewer people in this country. In 1966, the country had 200 million people. We now have 300 million people. And they would take us back to the levels then. It's obvious. It just simply wouldn't work. For those who think rewinding 45 years is a good thing, consider how much America has changed since 1966. For example, life expectancy is 9 years longer today than it was 45 years ago. Madam President, one reason it's longer is because of Medicare. Medicare has made people healthier and live longer and more productive lives. This legislation would roll back the progress that has been brought about by these programs, but especially Medicare. And it would enshrine in this thing they're trying to do in the House today a set of priorities so backward, even advisors to President Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush have called it unwise. In the first decade alone, it would mean more than $3,000 a year in cuts each senior's Social Security check. It would slash our Social Security net, decimate Medicaid, cut Medicare benefits by $2,500 for every senior. This is on a year, Madam President, every year. In fact, the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says that within 25 years, it will slash government benefits and services in half. Everyone within the sound of my voice, hear what I'm saying. Slash benefits in half. Veterans, Medicare, Medicaid, 70% of the people in Medicaid are people who are in convalescent centers. Cut those benefits in half. It's obvious that there wouldn't be people in convalescent centers. They would be at home having sons and daughters and wives and husbands trying to take care of them in their golden years, so-called golden years, which would come to a screeching halt. When I talk about slashing benefits in half, I'm talking about Social Security, I'm talking about Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, and every other government service, no matter how essential. Yet it would make it almost impossible to end even the most wasteful tax breaks and loopholes already in place, such as these subsidies to oil companies, who are making record profits but getting huge subsidies from American taxpayers. It would allow these benefits to go to corporations that ship jobs overseas and rich people who buy yachts and private jets. Madam President, if I were really rich, I wouldn't buy a yacht. It would be nice to have an airplane, though. This won't stop people from buying airplanes, but it'll make people it'll allow the tax program to treat these rich people like everybody else. It would require a two-thirds majority if the House prevails, if the House issue prevails. It would require a two-thirds majority in both houses of Congress to raise even a penny of new revenue. Meanwhile, the so-called cut, cap, and balance does absolutely nothing to protect our economy from the kind of recession from which we're now beginning to recover. In fact, if the economy wasn't already in recession, experts say this legislation would quickly produce one. Bruce Bartlett, an economic advisor to President Reagan, someone we all knew, fine man, and a Treasury official under President Bush, said that the kind of rapid spending cuts called for in this House legislation would, quote, unquestionably throw the economy into a recession, end of quote. This legislation goes beyond the draconian budget the Republicans passed earlier this year. That budget would have ended Medicare as we know it. It would have also cut clean energy by 70%, axed education funding, and cost hundreds of thousands of private sector jobs. It passed the House. It didn't pass here. But what they're trying to do today is even more draconian than the so-called Ryan budget, House-passed budget. What they're trying to do now is worse. It would attack all the same programs, but its cuts would be deeper and deeper. And it would slash Social Security as well, which the House budget didn't have that. This legislation that they're debating now in the House is so restrictive. Republicans' own budget, the budget that they passed earlier this year, wouldn't meet the standards they're now asking to be passed. It's so restrictive, not 1 year of either George W. Bush or Ronald Reagan administrations would meet its standards. Of the last 30 years, the only 2 years that would make the cut were during the Clinton administration. As the Washington Post said, quote, every single Republican has endorsed a constitutional amendment that would have made Ronald Reagan's fiscal policy unconstitutional. That's how far to the right the modern GOP has swung, close quotes. Bruce Bartlett, as we've talked about him before, said this about the legislation, quote, this is quite possibly the stupidest constitutional amendment I think I have ever seen. I repeat, a direct quote, this is quite possibly the stupidest constitutional amendment that I've ever seen. It looks as if it was drafted by a couple of interns on the back of a napkin, end of quote. And that, in my opinion, is being awfully hard on interns, Madam President. Bill Hoagland, Bill was on this floor working with us, really a fine man. He was a close advisor to Senator Domenici and other Republican senators. I worked with him here on this floor trying to get bills passed. A fine, fine man. Republican first, but wanting to get things done for our country second. Bill Hoagland, a budget advisor to Republican congressional leaders for a quarter of a century, described it best when he labeled this legislation a misleading political cheap shot. Direct quote from Bill Hoagland. A balanced budget is something we can all get behind. But this legislation isn't really about balancing the budget. It's about scoring political points. But based on 30 years of evidence and Republicans' own measuring stick, that stunt falls really flat. After all, who do you think helped President Clinton balance the budget during the only 2 years of the last 30 that actually lived up to the restrictive rules outlined in this legislation? Democrats in Congress. Today, Democrats are trying to rein in spending again. We're also trying to avert a catastrophic default on our nation's financial obligations. Republicans are the ones standing in the way of a deal to avert default, refusing to move an inch despite our efforts to cut trillions from the deficit. But, Madam President, it's just not me. Read today's Washington Post and see again what David Brooks says. David Brooks is a card-carrying Republican conservative. Read what he has to say. Read yesterday, a conservative columnist in the same newspaper, his name is Ross Douthat, wrote in the New York Times yesterday, we could already be on the way to a deal if, quote, more Republicans had only recognized that sometimes a well-chosen concession can be the better part of valor, end of quotes. We are arriving at a point here, Madam President, 2 weeks from today, we default on our debt. I have not heard a Republican leader. I have my friend on the floor today from the sister state of Arizona. He has always said that there will not be a default on the debt. Senator McConnell has said that. John Boehner has said that. Leader Cantor has said that. Proof is in the pudding. We have 2 weeks from today to prove that they're right. Announce morning business.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business for 2 hours, with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the majority and the Republicans controlling alternating 30-minute blocks, with the Republicans controlling the first block.
Madam President.
The Senator from Arizona.
Thank you, Madam President. First, let me reassure my friend and colleague, the Leader of the Senate, that it is our view that the debt ceiling will be extended, and Leader McConnell wanted to make that crystal clear in his discussions with Leader Reid so that the two of them could work together on a plan that the Senate could pass, send over to the House to ensure that our debt ceiling would be increased, and thus assure the markets that they need not be concerned about that fact. As I've said many times, Republicans are not going to be the ones that would throw us in default. Yesterday I spoke on the floor about the reason why Republicans are opposed to raising taxes. The President himself last December said that raising taxes in time of economic downturn would be a mistake, would be the wrong thing to do. And we're still in that economic downturn. In fact, things are worse now than they were then. And it's like a doctor treating a patient. When you diagnose what's wrong, you deal with what's wrong. You don't try to fix something else. Our problem is spending. It's not taxes. And that's why we need to focus on spending rather than taxes. At the conclusion of my remarks, I'm going to ask consent to put an op-ed from the Wall Street Journal in the record, and I'll speak to it a little bit later, but it's written by Michael Boskin, who makes the point very clear that our problem is spending, not taxes, and that we should be focused on reducing spending growth, especially in entitlements. Michael Boskin is a professor of economics at Stanford University and a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, and chaired the Economic Council of Advisors for the first President Bush. I'll refer to that again in a moment. But yesterday I said there were three reasons why Republicans were not willing to raise taxes at this time. The first was that the problem, as I said, is spending. It's not taxes. Spending has increased under President Obama from 20% of the GDP, which is the historic average, to 25% in just 3 years. And that's been the reasons why we've had a deficit of $1.5 trillion each of those years, and we'll see deficits in that order of magnitude out for as far as the eye can see. The second reason not to raise taxes is that when we talk about who the taxes actually apply to, it turns out they don't just apply to millionaires and billionaires. I pointed out that there were 319,000 households that report over $1 million in income tax. That's 319,000. But the tax the President is talking about would apply to 3.6 million taxpayers, more than 10 times that many. So the point is that frequently Democrats like to aim at the rich, the so-called millionaires and billionaires. They end up hitting a whole lot of other folks who aren't in that category of millionaire and billionaire. It's happened before with the alternative minimum tax that was originally to apply to 125 people, I think, and now applies to somewhere between 20 and 30 million households. So that's the second reason. And I might add, by the way, my friend, the majority leader, said a moment ago that there's nothing wrong with taxing yachts or airplanes. In fact, he'd rather even have an airplane than a yacht. Remember the experience we had with that. We were going to hit the big millionaires. And so in 1990, we raised the tax on yachts and other luxury items. Well, lo and behold, all of the people that made boats up in Maine and Massachusetts and the other states lost their jobs. I think it was something over 9,000 jobs were lost in the boat building industry. And Congress quickly repealed that. Within 3 years, we had repealed that big luxury tax. We weren't hitting the millionaires and billionaires. What we were hitting was the people who actually made the yachts. And right after 9/11, Congress passed a accelerated depreciation provision for the commercial aviation or the general aviation industry. The idea there was to make sure that 9/11 didn't hit that industry too hard and that jobs would be saved. In the President's stimulus bill, that accelerated depreciation provision for commercial jets, or business jets rather, was reauthorized. That's the thing we're talking about here when we talk about business jets. The President has said business jets shouldn't receive that kind of tax treatment. Well, the people who he said would be benefited by the stimulus package with jobs created or jobs saved are the people who will lose their jobs if that particular tax treatment is taken away. Now, maybe we should look at that. I'm not against looking at that tax treatment. If we should look at it and decide it's not appropriate, maybe people will lose their jobs, but we want to get rid of it. We should use whatever reduction that there is in that to create lower rates for corporations across the board, as the President has indicated, because then we can be more competitive with corporations abroad who have much lower corporate tax rates than the United States does. And that gets me to the third reason why we shouldn't raise tax rates, because it'll kill jobs. It'll hurt the economy. If you want to put people back to work, you cannot impose more burdens, either regulatory or tax burdens, on the very businesses that would create the jobs. Two-thirds of the jobs coming out of a recession are created by small businesses. 50% of the income of small businesses is reported in these top two income tax brackets that would be affected by the President's proposal to raise taxes. They would get hit by this, and as a result, they wouldn't hire as many people. Just a couple of items from today's paper that illustrates the point. From the Phoenix Business Journal, one of my hometown papers. U.S. small businesses out of gas on job creation. And they point out that small business owners continue to be pessimistic about the economy. New jobs are not to be found. Economic uncertainty is cited as the biggest obstacle to hiring. One of America's more colorful entrepreneurs, Steve Wynn, who's the CEO of Wynn Resorts in Nevada, one of the Majority Leader's constituents and a supporter of the Majority Leader and a self-described Democrat, says that this administration is the greatest wet blanket to business and progress and job creation in my lifetime. He goes on to say in his report to his company shareholders in the company's quarterly conference call that my customers, the companies that provide the vitality for the hospitality and restaurant industry in the United States of America, they're frightened of this administration, and it makes you slow down and not invest your money. And he goes on. And I've talked to Mr. Wynn. He is very concerned about the regulatory and tax burdens being imposed upon not just his industry, but across the board. That's what's inhibiting economic growth. One of the taxes proposed by the administration was evaluated by this administration's Small Business Administration, the Office of Advocacy for the SBA. And they said, and I'm quoting now, it could ultimately force many small businesses to close, end of quotes. Why would the administration propose a tax increase on, in this case, retailers and manufacturers primarily, that could ultimately force many small businesses to close, according to the administration's own SBA, Small Business Administration? It doesn't make sense. So for all three reasons, we shouldn't be raising taxes. The President was right last December, and the reason is because spending is the problem, not taxes, that we end up aiming at the millionaires and billionaires, but we hit a much broader swath of our economy, and third, because it would kill job creation and inhibit economic growth to enable us to get out of this recession. Final point I'd make here relates to that, and it's the Wall Street Journal op-ed of January 18th by Michael Boskin. And, Madam President, let me ask unanimous consent at the conclusion of my remarks, this editorial op-ed be printed.
Objection.
Thank you, Madam President. The point he makes here is, I'll just quote a couple points here, is that regarding the President's demand that we raise taxes, quote, his timing couldn't be worse. And let me just quote from this. Two problems arise when marginal tax rates are raised. First, as college students learn in Econ 101, higher marginal tax rates cause real economic harm. The combined marginal rate from all taxes is a vital metric, since it heavily influences incentives in the economy. Workers and employers, savers and investors base decisions on after-tax returns. Thus, tax rates need to be kept as low as possible on the broadest possible base, consistent with the financing necessary government spending. And the second point he makes is that as tax rates rise, the tax base shrinks, and ultimately you have a much smaller group of people paying at those very highest levels. He goes on to point out some examples of somebody in the upper brackets in the state of California, which is a high tax state. When you add in the California taxes, the payroll taxes to fund Obamacare, ultimately the President's idea of uncapping Social Security payroll taxes. The combined marginal rates would rise to a stunning 58.4%. And then, if you added in the requirements to pay for the additional costs of the excess spending that the administration has proposed, the taxes could drive the combined marginal rate to more than 70% by 2035, 80% by 2050. I mean, there's a point at which people are going to stop working for that next marginal dollar because most of it goes to Uncle Sam. In fact, he also takes the example of a teacher in California earning $60,000. And when you add in all of these other things, the marginal rate eventually goes to astounding 71%. And he says, quote, at the margin, virtually everyone would be working primarily for the government, reduced to a minority partner in their own labor. And one of his conclusions, and I'll just quote this and then conclude, higher tax rates are the major reason why European per capita income, according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, is about 30% lower than in the United States. So, Madam President, the point here is that imposing more taxes on the economy not only inhibits job creation, but it reduces productivity because Americans stop working that extra hour or that extra day in order to earn income, since most of what they earn is going to have to be turned right around and given to Uncle Sam. And that's part of the problem why the European standard of living is 30% lower than it is here in the United States. Do we want to get to where Europe is? And the answer, I think, is no. So we have to deal with extending the debt ceiling. We should try to reduce spending so that we don't have this future cloud hanging over our head, and frankly, to prevent having to come back to increasing the debt limit every few months or every few years. But the way to do that is not by raising taxes, which will not raise the revenues, it will inhibit economic growth, but rather by focusing on the real problem, which is spending, which has increased from 20 to 25% of GDP in just 3 years, by focusing on spending, getting spending under control. And I mentioned yesterday, for example, that the President had taken a lot of things off the table. My friend, the Majority Leader, said a moment ago the President has indicated he's willing to compromise about reducing spending. I don't think he is. I've been sitting in those negotiations. I haven't seen that. We proposed 3 things, just 3 things that wouldn't touch beneficiaries: Medicare, Medicaid, and uninsured benefits going to people who aren't supposed to get them, or overpayments. You could save over $100 billion a year by simply not paying people what the law says they shouldn't receive, just stopping the overpayments or paying people that aren't eligible for one of those 3 services. You're not touching anybody who is currently eligible for Medicare, Medicaid, or uninsured benefits. You're not touching them. They receive their full benefits. But let's watch out for taxpayer dollars. The problem is it's like renting a used car. Has anybody here ever washed a rental car? When you rent a car, you go home and the first thing you do, you wash it, or you get a little bit dirty, you wash it before you turn it in? No. This is somebody else's money and people aren't watching it. It's taxpayer money that's now administered by the federal government through Medicare, Medicaid, and unemployed insurance. And the reality is people aren't trying to stop the waste, fraud, and abuse. All of that's taken off the table. Nope, the administration says we don't want to talk about that because we don't want people that receive those benefits to have to sacrifice. Well, the people who are receiving the benefits aren't sacrificing. The taxpayers are the ones sacrificing by contributing money to the government that's then wasted. There is plenty of reform out there to stop wasteful Washington spending. If the administration would be willing to do those things, then I think we could find enough savings so that we wouldn't have to even be talking about tax increases, which, for the 3 reasons that I mentioned, are so harmful to our society, to our families, to our businesses, and to our economy. So, Madam President, I hope that as we continue this debate, my colleagues debate the so-called cut, cap, and balance legislation. That does require cutting spending, constraining it over time, and ensuring that over the long term, over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, that these savings don't all evaporate because we go back to our big spending ways. At least a balanced budget amendment would prevent us from doing that. And so I fully support the legislation that's going to be brought forward. I presume it will pass the House of Representatives this evening, and I'm looking forward to the debate here in the Senate so that we can try to adopt that same legislation. Madam President, I observe the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka.
I'll be lifted.
Without objection.
Madam President, there is no question that we need to make smart decisions to tighten our belts and reduce our nation's debt and deficit. American families have done it around their kitchen table, and we owe it to them to get our fiscal house in order. But there's also one group of Americans that we owe an even greater promise to, a group who we can never allow to become pawns or fall through the cracks or be forgotten altogether in these budget debates. And that is our men and women in uniform and the veterans who have protected our nation for decades. And that's why I'm here today on the floor. In the midst of the whirlwind of debt and deficit rhetoric, to remind us all of the critical nature of the bill that is on the floor this week. To remind us all that no matter what fiscal crisis we face, no matter how divided we may be over approaches to cutting our debt and deficit, no matter how heated the rhetoric gets here in Washington, D.C., we have to keep our commitments to our veterans and service members, and we have to move this bill forward. And we have to provide for those who wore or who are wearing the uniform with the peace of mind that we are keeping up our promise to them. Now, Madam President, a couple of years ago, we took a proactive step to make sure that the nonstop wrangling over appropriations bills here in Congress didn't interfere with the health care that our veterans have earned. Thanks to the work of Senator Akaka and many others, the VA spending for health care is now appropriated a year in advance, protecting it from an imperfect budget process that is so often affected by politics. But I remember that when we passed advanced appropriations, we were very clear. Our foresight was not going to be an excuse to sit in our hands when VA funding was up for consideration. We were not going to allow a precautionary measure to get in the way of passing timely increases in veterans' health care. And so this bill is the test. Can we put politics aside for the good of our nation's veterans and service members? Can we show them that despite our differences, we will work as diligently towards getting them the benefits and care they've earned as they have worked for our nation? Well, I hope we can. And I say that because the investments in this bill are a lot more than numbers on a page. They are life-changing programs for veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury. It's support for suicide hotlines that are seeing more callers than ever before. It's providing roofs over the heads of our service members and their families. It's timely investments in the very biggest priorities of our nation's heroes. And so today I want to talk about just a few of the investments that are included in the bill that we're considering today and how they translate into the lives of our service members, our veterans, and critically, their families. Madam President, there is an influx of young veterans coming into the VA system right now like we have not seen in a very long time. In fact, the VA estimates that the number of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans in its health care system will reach well over 500,000 at some point next year. That is an over 100% increase since 2008. This is a big challenge, and one that we have no choice but to step up to meet if we're going to avoid some of the same mistakes we saw with the Vietnam generation. That's why this bill includes nearly $3 billion to meet the health care needs of veterans who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, which is a nearly $600 million increase over last year. But it's more than just the sheer number of new veterans that will be coming home to the VA in the near future. It's the extent of their wounds, both visible and invisible, that will require an untold resource from our nation. You know, through the wonders of modern medicine, service members who would have been lost in previous conflicts are coming home to live productive and fulfilling lives. But they will need a lifetime of care from the VA. And that's why part of this bill includes significant investments for research in a number of areas, including traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injury, polytrauma injuries, and sensory loss. It includes funding that will go to maintaining world-class prosthetics, like the one that was worn by Sergeant Leroy Petre, who I saw at the White House last week shake the hand of a grateful President Obama as he was awarded the Medal of Honor. It's also funding that comes at a critical time as amputations have sharply increased among soldiers in Afghanistan. many of whom are getting out of protected MRAP and Humvees to engage Afghan citizens and at the same time putting themselves at far greater risk of severe IED injuries. According to a recent Washington Post article, twice as many U.S. soldiers wounded in battle last year required limb amputations than in either of the 2 previous years. This funding also comes as mental health concerns continue to rise and suicides among active duty troops and veterans from these wars have risen to a level now on par with combat deaths. In April, the VA suicide hotline took 14,000 suicide calls, more than they have taken in any month in the previous 4 years. So, Madam President, this bill makes sure we're putting someone on the other end of that call. This bill funds efforts to give veterans access to mental health professionals and ensures we're not leaving our veterans to go it alone. But, Madam President, this will do much more than help our newest generation of veterans. For generations, we have faced the problems of homelessness among our nation's veterans without making any real headway. Recently, through the success of programs like HUD-VASH and the Grant Per Diem program, we are seeing real progress towards putting homeless veterans into safe and secure housing. And the bold goals laid out by the Obama administration to end veterans' homelessness once and for all. So this bill includes nearly $1 billion in direct assistance to homeless veterans. And this bill helps those who have taken on the monumental but deeply personal task of providing care to an injured veteran in their family. Those people who have left behind their own careers and personal lives and even their own health care and benefits to care for those who can't take care of themselves. It includes major investments to meet the unique needs of one of the fastest growing groups of veterans, women veterans, who through health care and construction upgrades that improve privacy will benefit from VA facilities that are more conducive to their needs. This bill also includes major investments to fund military construction projects worldwide, including readiness centers, barracks, hospitals, clinics, and schools. It also supports family housing construction projects that ensure military families have a satisfactory roof over their heads. And that, by the way, will create thousands of good-paying jobs. As we all know, the strength of our military is rooted in the strength of the families that support them. Investments like these are what allows our service members to go abroad, knowing that their loved ones are being looked after by the nation that they are protecting. Madam President, after nearly a decade at war, the consequences of sending our service members into combat and the sacred obligation we have to care for those injured in service have become clear. But so have the shortcomings and the challenges we have to meet. Last week, I chaired a hearing on the gaps to mental health care that still exist at the VA, and the stories we heard were deeply frustrating. I heard the stories of 2 separate veterans who attempted suicide but were still left to wait for weeks and even months for appointments into the VA. We have to fix the way the VA meets that obligation so that they're more flexible and responsive to the needs of today's veterans. And we have to do it in a cost-effective way by making sure that we're getting the most value out of every dollar that a bill like this one provides. Next week in our committee, I will be examining the long-term costs of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan to our newest generation of veterans, because I believe we need to address this problem openly and honestly. Madam President, like generations of service members and veterans before them, today's heroes have done everything that has been asked of them. They've been separated from their families through repeat deployments. They have sacrificed life and limb in combat, and they've done all this selflessly and with honor to our country. We cannot allow our commitment to them to lapse or to get caught up in politics. That's why we need to pass this bill. And we must also come to a budget agreement that avoids default and the consequences that would have on our veterans. We have to keep our promise no matter what. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
President,
The Senator from New York.
First, I want to thank my colleague from the great state of Washington for her remarks and her never-ending, strong and successful defense of our veterans who have done so much for us. So I want to salute my colleague from Washington State. I'm going to speak on two topics for the 10 minutes I have allotted, Madam President. First, on Abby Wambach, the pride of Rochester, and the U.S. women's national soccer team, and then on the cut, cap, and unbalance plan that is now being debated in the House and soon will be debated in the Senate. First, Madam President, I rise to recognize the extraordinary efforts of the U.S. women's national soccer team in this year's World Cup, and in particular, Pittsford, New York's own Abby Wambach. Over the last month, the women's national team has taken this country on the ride of a lifetime that we won't soon forget. From their nail-biting effort to qualify for the World Cup to their heroic comeback against Brazil in the quarterfinals, this team showed the best of America during this World Cup. And at each stage of this team's success, there was a driving force, a player who learned the game from her older brothers on the soccer fields of New York's greater Rochester region, a player named Abby Wambach. Hundreds of Rochester's fans gathered at her brother's pub to cheer on Abby as she headed ball after ball into the back of the net. In the past few years, and especially the past month or so, Abby has become a household name. Fans from Rochester, the state of New York, and across the country watched in awe of Abby as she led the U.S. squad throughout the World Cup. But in Rochester, Madam President, and the surrounding area, Abby's been a star ever since she played on Our Lady of Mercy High School's varsity team as an 8th grader. Unusually young to be playing on a varsity squad, she helped her team achieve a Section 5 title. And as is clear to all of us that have watched Abby over the years, her success has continued ever since. From Our Lady of Mercy to the Olympic Games in Athens and the 2011 World Cup, Abby has been an incredible player and leader at every turn. Abby Wambach has always represented the best that New York has to offer, and given young women across the country someone to look up to. And the last month of the World Cup action has only cemented her legacy as one of the greatest U.S. women's soccer players of all time. She scored over 120 international goals, none more dramatic or meaningful than her goal against Brazil in the quarterfinals. No matter the odds or the score, Americans will never give up and always believe, and Abby and her teammates showed that same drive and desire during the game against Brazil. Abby and the U.S. soccer team created a moment that will live long in the sports lore of our nation. As the buzz continues about her goal, there are some people close to Abby who probably weren't surprised. For those who watched Abby during her sophomore year score 2 goals and make a clutch penalty kick that vaulted Our Lady of Mercy to the Section 5 championship match, they know that this is just what Abby Wambach does. For months, Abby has been a long way from home, but tomorrow she'll get the warm Rochester welcome she comes to know when her Magic Jack club faces the Western New York Flash. Of course, we all know that the efforts of the U.S. women's team came just short in the end, and we can't help but be happy for the Japanese team and the entire country as they finally have something to celebrate after the challenging months they've been through. So Japan may have won this round, and congratulations to them, but they should know the U.S. women's soccer team will see them in London for the Olympics next summer and again for the World Cup in Canada in 2015, with the pride of Rochester, Abby Wambach, leading the way. And now, to perhaps a less happy subject, the so-called cut, cap, and balance plan. Well, let me just say that we're going to be debating this in the House and then the Senate over the next week. Theater trumps serious solutions, as the House Republicans plan a vote on their unrealistic cut, cap, and balance proposal. It truly is theater trumping serious solutions when you put something on the floor that you know may not pass your own body in the House, certainly won't pass the Senate, and would be vetoed by the President, at a time when our nation's credit is teetering on the edge. Let's stop playing games and solve this problem once and for all. And what we on this side call the plan we on this side of the aisle call the plan cut, cap, and kill Medicare, for one good reason. Under the reckless plan, seniors could see their Medicare cuts go up by $2,500 beyond Ryan cuts. Social Security benefits could be slashed by $3,000 a year. It is the Ryan plan on steroids. The Ryan plan has been seriously rejected in a bipartisan vote in this body. The American people dislike it intensely. And yet, now we've done something that's even more extreme. If you thought it wasn't possible to be more extreme, look at the cut, cap, and kill Medicare plan that some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle are offering. And there's three things wrong with their plan, Madam President. First, we have a serious debt problem. If the credit of the United States goes into default, we will pay the price for a decade. It will make our deficit worse. It will raise costs to the federal government because interest rates on federal bonds will go up and stay up for a very long time. It will raise the cost to average homeowners because both mortgages and credit card rates will go up. It could very well send our economy back into a recession. So let's roll up our sleeves, let's compromise, and let's meet in the middle and do something that will both end our deficit problem, reduce our debt, and make sure that we're able to pay the debts that we've already incurred. But no, theater is the day. You know, Madam President, when ideologues don't see the world as it is. I read some of the statements by some of the freshman colleagues from the Republican side in the House. They just don't get it. Their view is that they are so right, that all they have to do is put this on the floor and all of America and every other senator and congressman will go along. Ideologues don't see the world for as it is, and that's why I've never been too fond of them, whether they're on the far right or the far left. And yet that's who's governing here. You read those statements in the papers this morning. All they have to do is put this out there, and everyone will see the righteousness of their cause. Well, I have a word for them. Slashing Medicare, slashing Social Security is not the right thing to do, and I will never see things that way. Saying that millionaires should continue to get tax breaks while we're slashing Social Security and killing Medicare is something I will never go along with, nor will a single colleague on my side of the aisle. So it is not going to pass. It is theater and politics at its worst. It is ideologues governing or trying to govern. They're not able to govern because they don't see the grays in the world. It's only black or white. And so the plan has three strikes against it. One, it won't solve the problem in its political theater. Two, it will kill Medicare as we know it. That's why we call it cut, cap, and kill Medicare. And three, it will not do a thing to help the middle class while giving huge tax breaks to millionaires and corporate America. That is not the plan America wants. That is not the plan America needs. That is not the plan that will pass. And so, you know, I understand that many of us have to bow to an extreme base in a party. And that happens around here a lot. But not when we're 2 weeks away from defaulting on our debt. Not when we're 2 weeks away from potentially walking off the cliff and incur injuries that we'll never recuperate from. I call on my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to stop the theater, to stop throwing red meat to the hard right base, and join us in really solving the problems of America. I yield the floor. And I yield the floor.